I'd just returned from braving the Saturday sidewalk circus that is Manhattan grocery shopping. Specifically, the corner specialty store where Nero Wolfe insists they carry the only acceptable imported paprika worth its salt, when I spotted the stranger standing awkwardly just inside the vestibule. That wasn't remarkable in itself. People occasionally found their way to our door with everything from desperate cases to cookie samples. What was interesting was that this particular guy was holding a brown paper bag like it contained a plutonium, and he wasn't making any move to buzz the bell or knock. He was just waiting. I stepped inside, shut the door behind me, and gave him a once-over. Late 30s, salt and pepper stubble, too organized to be accidental, and the kind of posture that says, "Trust me," which in my experience means the opposite. His suit was expensive but stiff. New money trying to look like old. And the bag. No label. Just a small oil stain on the bottom and a folded-over top. He spoke before I could ask. "Is this the residence of Mr. Nero Wolfe?" "You've got it, and you've got me too, Archie Goodwin. You're the guy who brings problems. I'm the guy who decides if they're interesting enough to interrupt Wolfe's lunch, which, I'll warn you, is happening in about 7 minutes. He nodded, like that was a perfectly rational arrangement. "I need to speak with Mr. Wolfe. It's about a missing item, something small, but significant." I took a look at the bag again. "You sure it's not in there?" He tightened his grip on it. "This is part of it. The rest is complicated." "Oh, good. Complicated. Just what Wolfe likes with his squab and beer." I motioned him inside. "All right, Mr. Dr. Calvin Rusk. I'm a culinary chemist." Now that was a new one. Then this better not be about a poisoned salt shaker or some half-baked soufflé sabotage. Rusk offered a ghost of a smile, but his eyes were dead serious. It's about a formula, an ingredient that was never meant to be used and now may have disappeared." I led him into the front room and buzzed the office, letting Wolfe know we had a guest. I kept it short. No point in stirring the bear more than necessary. "Client type. Says something's missing. Not a person. A food item." There was a pause. Then the voice, deep and round and unmistakably annoyed. "Bring him." Wolfe was at his desk, his bulk comfortably settled like a reluctant boulder in a leather fault line. Fritz had just cleared the remains of lunch, grilled veal kidneys with sherry vinegar, which I'd passed on, and Wolfe was sipping beer from a chilled glass that looked comically dainty in his fingers. He glanced at Rusk once, then ignored him, addressing me instead. "Archie, explain." Rusk didn't wait. "Mr. Wolfe, I apologize for the intrusion. I'm in possession of a sample of a highly specialized flavor compound. It was developed for a private client, a rare culinary commission. Last week I confirmed it had been tampered with, and now the base ingredient, one that can't be sourced commercially, is missing from my lab." Wolfe arched an eyebrow. "This is theft." Rusk hesitated. "Possibly. Or industrial espionage. The ingredient was unique, and my formula was under contract with a high-profile restaurateur who hasn't returned my call since Tuesday." That got Wolfe's other eyebrow moving. "Names, doctor," I said. "Start with who the client was." "Antonia Vale, owner of Atelier Vale." I whistled low. "Fancy. 3 stars, 2 lawsuits, and 1 scandalized food critic. She commissioned a flavor enhancer meant to be incorporated into a single signature dish, what she calls a perceptual anchor." Wolfe rolled his eyes. "Gibberish." "It's culinary psychology," Rusk said stiffly. "The idea is to create a compound that evokes an emotional memory and fixes it in the diner's experience. In this case, the signature dish would involve an ingredient nobody could identify, but everyone would feel they remembered. And now the key to this concoction is gone," Wolfe said. "Yes, and it gets worse. This morning, someone tried to break into my lab. They didn't take anything, but they left the refrigerator door open. The sample was exposed to air, possibly degraded, but they didn't take the bag. He held it out. Wolfe didn't budge. I took it and placed it on Wolfe's desk. Wolfe stared at it like it had personally insulted his orchids. "What precisely am I to do with this, Doctor?" Wolfe asked. "You've lost an ingredient and a contact. You suspect theft and subterfuge. Hire a locksmith and a lawyer." Rusk leaned forward. "Mr. Wolfe, I believe the sample, or something derived from it, is already being used. Without permission. Perhaps at another restaurant. If so, that's not only theft, it's a breach of contract with enormous financial and reputational stakes. But here's the worst part. The ingredient is traceable. In the wrong proportions, it causes a numbing effect. If someone's modified it, it could make people sick." Wolfe said nothing for a long moment. Then, finally, "Archie, have Fritz examine the sample. We'll consider whether this rises to the level of criminality or merely culinary pretension." Rusk opened his mouth to protest, then seemed to think better of it. I took the bag and turned to leave. As I passed Wolfe's chair, he said without looking up, "And Archie, when you return, bring me the contract between Dr. Rusk and Miss Vale. I wish to see the wording." That meant we were taking the case, whether Wolfe admitted it or not. When he starts asking about contracts, he's already planning the cross-examination. And that's how it started. Not with a scream or a shot, but with a mystery spice that nobody bought, everybody wanted, and one man might have stolen without ever stepping foot inside a store. Shall I get the magnifying glass or the menu? Depends on who cooked up this mess. When I brought the brown paper bag down to the kitchen, Fritz took one look at it like I'd delivered him a dead rat wrapped in butcher paper. He was slicing fennel for the evening course and didn't appreciate chemical interlopers in his workspace, especially ones that came bearing vague threats and gourmet paranoia. I assured him the bag didn't contain plague spores, only a sample of some taste bud voodoo that may or may not be poisoning the high-paying elite. That got me a flat look and then a shrug. He took the bag with a pair of tongs, peeled it open like he expected it to bark, and began his own brand of forensic evaluation. I left him to it and headed back up. Wolfe hadn't moved, of course. He was still at his desk, glowering at the wall like it owed him money. Rusk had taken the red leather chair to the left, but he looked as if he'd rather be anywhere else. He hadn't spoken since I left, which told me Wolfe had either intimidated him into silence or bored him into it. Both were equally likely. "He'll call up if the thing melts his eyebrows," I told Wolfe, meaning Fritz. "I want the contract," Wolfe said. "I told him to email it to me." Rusk cut in. "I don't usually carry printed documents around with spice bags." "Bah." Wolfe shifted his bulk with visible irritation. "Then you will return tomorrow with the contract and with your signature on a retainer. If I'm to entertain this absurdity, I require formality." Rusk started to object, but Wolfe waved a hand like brushing away a leaf. "And I want names. Not restaurant names. People. Who was aware of this compound? Who handled it? Who might have found it irresistible?" "I can prepare a list," Rusk said. "You will," Wolfe replied. "And you will include their professional history with Miss Vale and with you. I want connections, Doctor. Motive is bred in proximity." I don't think Rusk liked being spoken to like a misbehaving apprentice chef. But he nodded. Once he'd slunk out, bagless and slightly rattled, I turned to Wolfe, who was now staring at a spot in the corner of the ceiling with interest that could only mean mental digestion. "Okay," I said, sitting. "We're taking the case, even if you won't say the words." He grunted. "We are observing. Call it what you like. But you just told him to bring witnesses and evidence." "I told him to bring people who irritate me less than he does. That is all." I cracked my knuckles. "Let me guess. You think he's lying?" "No. Wolfe sipped his beer. "But he is concealing." That sounded about right. The whole thing reeked of something more than a missing additive. For a guy who claimed to work with molecules and memories, Rusk seemed far too worried about what people might remember or forget. Right then, the bell rang. Not the doorbell, the upstairs bell, the one Wolfe keeps connected to the greenhouse where his orchids live better than most Manhattan tenants. That meant Fritz was done inspecting the sample. I went up. Fritz had the bag open on a steel tray. The contents weren't glamorous. A small vial, dark glass with a grey cap. No label. Next to it, a folded index card with tiny notes in purple ink. He handed it to me. "It's odorless," he said, "and inert at room temperature. But it left a residue on the card. Something not stable. It reacts faintly to moisture." Any guesses? Fritz gave me the tight-lipped look he uses when he doesn't want to insult my intelligence but still has to deliver news. "It's not food," he said. "At least not in any conventional sense. It's a base compound. Possibly synthetic. It may require a carrier. Oil, vinegar, some solvent. But I would not eat it. Not without gloves." I returned downstairs and relayed the summary. Wolfe nodded slowly. "So, it is not merely exotic. It is unnatural. That's what we're dealing with. Also, it seems this flavor formula might have a side effect, temporary numbness. Rusk said in the wrong hands, it could screw up someone's nervous system, make them lose sensation. Maybe worse." That finally got Wolfe to lean back fully, his lips curling in distaste. "This is not flavor," he muttered. "This is mimicry. Alchemy dressed as cuisine." I was about to make a crack about witches in aprons when the bell rang again. This time, the front door. I opened it to find a woman who looked like she'd been styled for a cooking competition where the loser got sued. Tall, angular, wrapped in a long burgundy coat and sporting sunglasses, despite the fact that the sky was grayer than Wolfe's view of humanity. She held a slim silver clutch and a look that said I was neither interesting nor particularly relevant. "I'm here to speak with Mr. Wolfe," she said, "regarding Calvin Rusk." "Do tell." "I'm Antonia Vale," she said, brushing past me before I could make up a clever reply. I watched her stalk into the office like she owned the floorboards. Wolfe, seeing her, did something rare. He blinked twice. She didn't wait to be asked. "If you're investigating Rusk, you should be aware. He's not the victim he claims to be." Wolfe gestured to the chair Rusk had just vacated. "Sit. Speak." And just like that, the brownstone was disturbed. Again. Only this time, the ingredient we'd been missing wasn't in a bottle. It had just walked in wearing heels. Antonia Vale sat like someone used to having the room adjust to her shape. She didn't cross her legs or fidget or play with her clutch. She simply looked at Wolfe and waited for the world to acknowledge her presence. I've seen people who pretend to own the air in the room. Vale seemed to charge rent for it. Wolfe, not one to let anyone dictate the pace in his office, let a good 30 seconds pass before speaking. "Miss Vale, I understand you commissioned a compound from Dr. Calvin Rusk. He alleges it has been tampered with, perhaps stolen, and possibly replicated without permission." She nodded. "And he's correct, but he failed to mention that he violated the terms of our agreement and may have endangered my entire business in the process." That got Wolfe's attention, though you wouldn't know it unless you were trained to read his eyebrows. "Specify." He was to deliver a proprietary compound that would be used solely in a controlled kitchen environment under my supervision. We signed an NDA, and I paid him handsomely for the exclusivity. Last week, a food critic named Molly Edevane published an online review of a small pop-up dinner on the Lower East Side. She described a dish featuring a flavor that tasted like a forgotten memory soaked in rain. It was word for word what I described to Rusk in our development meetings. My meetings. My concept, "Do you have the article?" I asked. I printed it. She handed me a folded sheet from her clutch. The review was enthusiastic, almost lyrical. Edivane had apparently cried while eating a soup she said reminded her of her father's umbrella. Ridiculous, but I've heard worse from people selling truffle foam. Wolfe's eyes narrowed at the printout. You're suggesting Rusk sold the compound to another chef? I'm suggesting, she said coldly, that either Rusk sold it or someone close to him copied it. He's careless with his process. He trusts his lab assistant too much. And he talks when he drinks. You've seen him drink? She allowed a small smirk. We had dinner once, after a tasting session. He's talented but weak. The kind of man who wants to believe no one would betray him. Then he is a fool, Wolfe murmured. She shifted slightly in her chair. I want to know who used my flavor profile, and I want them shut down. You're not interested in prosecution? She shrugged. I'm interested in control. If this gets out, it won't matter who developed what. The narrative will be that I stole it. I'm opening another location in Chicago next month. Investors are watching. Then I take it you would not wish to appear in court, Wolfe said flatly. Of course not. That was interesting. She didn't blink. Wolfe turned his eyes to me. Archie, you will go to this pop-up location. Find the chef responsible. Speak to Miss Edivane if you can. Determine what was used, when it was used, and if there are samples. I nodded. And if I find Rusk's magic powder on their shelf? Take a photograph. Do not touch it. We will have Mr. Panzer verify it. Wolfe turned back to Vale. Miss Vale, I will accept your case on the condition that your contract with Rusk be delivered here by morning. You will not speak to him, nor threaten him, nor interfere with his movements, until I complete my investigation. She smiled faintly. I never threaten. It's too obvious. With that, she rose, adjusted the cuff of her coat, and glided out the way she came. After the door shut, Wolfe exhaled through his nose. She is dangerous. She's also right, I said. That review practically glowed. She may be right, but she is also lying. She said she wanted control, not truth. I nodded. You think she doesn't care who took it, only that she gets to decide what happens next. Precisely. Wolfe sipped his beer. And I suspect Dr. Rusk will become inconvenient very soon. I checked the time. You want me to head to this pop-up now? If you must. Wolfe leaned back. But take care. If this compound is truly active, you may find people willing to protect it. He wasn't wrong. Food people may wear aprons and smile for cameras, but scratch the surface and you find teeth. I grabbed my coat, printed a copy of the review for backup, and caught a cab downtown. The address was a loft over a reclaimed gallery near Delancey. When I got there, it was empty except for a guy in a chef's coat and boots scrubbing down stainless steel counters. A few chairs were still stacked, the remnants of last night's miracle dinner. I flashed my license and gave him the short version. Looking into a compound that might have shown up in your kitchen. From a guy named Rusk. Ever heard of him? The chef, a pale kid with a lip ring and a neck tattoo that said, Clean Plate Club, gave a shrug. Name's familiar. One of our investors mentioned something about flavor chemists. But I don't deal with that side. I just plate. I showed him the review. You cooked this? He looked it over. Yeah. We called it memory broth. Had a weird tang to it, like pine resin and thyme, but cooler. Left your tongue kind of buzzy. People loved it. No idea what was in it. I just followed the prep notes. Where are the prep notes? Back storage. Hang on. He disappeared into the back and came out with a laminated card. It listed ingredients, prep steps, and at the bottom, in red ink. Add 0.5 milliliters, compound Zed. Post-boil, stir clockwise, serve within 3 minutes. I snapped a photo. Where's compound Z now? He pointed to a steel fridge. Inside was a locked black case with a keypad. That came from one of the partners, he said. Only she knows the code. Tall woman, blonde, real sharp. Name's Melba. No last name. She does concept development. Interesting. Where can I find Melba? He shrugged. She doesn't exactly leave forwarding addresses, but she's got a habit of showing up at food pop-ups when she's recruiting new chefs. You could try a tasting event tomorrow night at the Edison rooftop. I made a note. One last thing. Anyone else touch the compound? Not that I know of. Melba handled it herself. That's when my phone buzzed. Wolfe. Yes? His voice was flat. Mr. Goodwin, Dr. Rusk has just phoned. He reports his assistant has gone missing. Define missing? He arrived at the lab to find it locked. She's not answering calls, and the landlord states she did not return last night. He suspects foul play. And? Wolfe grunted. And I suspect orchestration. Return at once. We must assess the timeline. I looked at the locked case inside the fridge, the laminated card with the mystery dose, and the faint buzzing in the back of my head that said someone was pulling strings before we even smelled the soup. On my way, I said. By the time I walked back through the brownstone door, it was 9:15 and the building smelled like garlic and defeat. Fritz, despite the evening's culinary detour, had managed to finish dinner without a hint of panic, but I could hear his disapproval in the silence that hung between courses. Wolfe didn't tolerate interruption lightly, and an assistant disappearing in the middle of a flavor feud counted as interruption with sauce on the side. I gave Wolfe the rundown in his office. Melba, the concept developer, the black case in the fridge, and the suspicious ingredient labeled only as Compound Z. Wolfe, in his chair, did not move during the entire delivery. When I was done, he simply said, "And the assistant?" "Name's Maddie Lentz. Rusk says she handles his schedules, his storage protocols, and occasionally preps raw materials under supervision. Lives in Soho. No one's seen her since yesterday afternoon." She was involved in the compound's formulation. Partially. Rusk says she didn't know the full blend, but she was there during synthesis steps. She'd know what it looked like, what it reacted to, and, this part's new, she was once a sous chef at Atelier Vale. Wolfe's eyes opened just a fraction wider. Miss Vale's restaurant. Right. He closed them again. Then we have a triangle, perhaps a hexagon. That many sides, huh? Motive is shaped by geometry, Mr. Goodwin. Miss Vale needs exclusivity. Dr. Rusk needs credibility. Miss Lentz may have needed leverage. Or escape, I offered. If she sold something she wasn't supposed to, and someone caught wind, that's motive for disappearance. Indeed. Wolfe tapped a finger on the armrest. And Miss Vale is silent about their prior association. I nodded. Which means she either doesn't know, or she's hiding it. She knows, Wolfe said flatly. I was about to ask what made him so sure when the phone rang. Wolfe answered it himself, which was rare. Even rarer was the clipped, unsentimental, "Yes, thank you." That followed. He hung up and looked at me. That was Saul Panzer. He located Miss Lentz's building manager. She hasn't been seen in 24 hours. Her keys were left in her mailbox. Her apartment door was locked from the outside. Break-in? Number lock. Changed. By someone with the same brand of key the landlord uses. That had implications. Someone either had access to landlord equipment or was someone the landlord trusted, which meant this was planned, not panic. Saul's waiting for instructions, Wolfe said. I told him to remain nearby and observe the building until further notice. If Miss Lentz returns, she is to be followed. If anyone else attempts entry, he is to photograph them. Got it, Wolfe exhaled. And now, Mr. Goodwin, we must determine what was taken, not just in ingredients, but in loyalty. Meaning, Miss Lentz may have been the weak link in both houses, Rusk's and Vale's. If she sold the compound formula, she may have sold it twice, or regretted selling it once. Or someone regretted her having sold it at all. Wolfe didn't reply, which in wolf speak meant we were circling the center of the bullseye. The next morning I got a call from a name I didn't expect to see flash on my phone. Molly Edivane, the critic whose poetic review helped light this whole powder keg. "I was told you had questions," she said, "about the dinner I attended last Thursday." "You were told right. I'd love to know more about the dish you wrote about, the one that sent your readers into a frenzy over spoonfuls of nostalgia." She chuckled. "They exaggerate. But yes, it was unusual. I've tasted thousands of experimental dishes, and that one was specific, like a memory that doesn't belong to you. Haunting, in a way." "Do you remember who served it?" "A woman introduced it. Tall, blonde, wore gloves. Said it was a pilot recipe being tested for future development. Didn't give a name." "That had to be Melba. And gloves." That supported Fritz's theory. This wasn't edible in the usual sense. "Did anyone else comment on a physical reaction?" "One guest said his lips tingled. Another claimed it reminded him of the smell of his grandmother's attic. That kind of dish." "Did you take photos?" "Of the dish. Number, but of the event, yes. I posted a few." "Why?" "Mind sending those along?" She did. A minute later, I had 3 grainy phone shots, tables with minimalist centerpieces, dim lighting, wine glasses. But in one corner, you could clearly see the woman with the gloves. Standing behind her was another figure, half-turned, speaking to someone else. I zoomed in. The figure had red hair and a nervous stance. Not much to go on, but enough. I sent the shot to Saul. His reply came an hour later. "Hair matches Maddie Lentz. Clothes similar to what landlord said she wore Thursday. Timing fits." So Lentz was at the dinner. Not missing, at least not then. Which begged the question, who saw her after? By noon, Rusk returned to the brownstone, haggard and barely shaved. He dropped a manila envelope on Wolfe's desk, the contract with Miss Vale. "She's going to bury me," he muttered. "You know that, right? If this comes out in the press, she'll make sure I'm done." Wolfe didn't even look up. "If your assistant was present at a private tasting of a proprietary flavor you claim was stolen, your career may be the least of your concerns." Rusk slumped into the red chair. "I didn't authorize her to attend." "No," Wolfe said mildly, "but you may have mentioned it to her. Or she read your schedule. Or perhaps she was invited by Miss Vale." Rusk looked up sharply. "They knew each other, but I didn't think—" "You didn't think." Wolfe opened the contract. Clause 7, subheading C. All derivative variations of the compound remain intellectual property of the client, to be stored in controlled conditions under exclusive access. He looked at Rusk. "Did Miss Lentz have access to storage?" "She handled refrigeration. I trusted her." Wolfe made a sound that could have been a sigh or indigestion. "Dr. Rusk, you have been careless with your creation, reckless with your communications, and blind to the ambitions of those around you. You allowed 2 women with competing interests to circle your formula like wolves at a lamb. And now she's gone." Wolfe's voice dropped. "If she has been harmed, it is your negligence that enabled it." Rusk didn't reply. He just sat there, staring at the table like it might answer for him. Wolfe finally said, "Archie, locate Melba." "Already on it. Edison rooftop tonight. Supposed to be trolling for new talent." "Attend. Observe. Do not engage unless necessary." "Understood." As I stood, Wolfe added one more thing. "And if you see Miss Lentz," he said softly, "make sure she's still breathing." The Edison rooftop was the kind of place where being seen mattered more than eating, where menus used more adjectives than ingredients, and everyone carried a glass of something they couldn't pronounce. I showed up just after 6 with a clean suit, empty stomach, and one of Wolfe's favorite pocket notebooks tucked in my inside coat. The notebook wasn't for sentiment. It was to jot down names, accents, menu items, and anything that might scream sabotage. The evening's tasting showcase was a collision of upstart culinary minds and well-dressed investors sniffing for the next edible Picasso. I moved through the crowd like a waiter with selective memory, smiling, listening, not lingering. My job wasn't to sample foie gras ice cream or vegan marrow toast. It was to find Melba, or Maddie Lentz, preferably both. I spotted her near the herb wall. Melba, tall, hair pulled tight in a high twist, dressed in a silver pantsuit that looked too sharp to sit down in. She was laughing with two men and nodding as if she'd invented food. In her left hand, she held a tall glass of cucumber gin fizz. On her right wrist, a red leather band, not decorative, more like a discreet key fob. I eased closer. "Melba," I said, smoothly. "Your work at the pop-up last week? Unreal. That flavor memory thing, it's still got my palate doing therapy." She turned, sizing me up. "Have we met?" "Not officially. I was there Thursday. Friend of one of the guest investors. You served a broth that made me remember my piano teacher's perfume. I never even had one." She smirked. "That's the idea." "So who's your supplier?" I asked, letting just enough curiosity slip through. She raised an eyebrow. "Develop, I don't source. But you do carry your own stock." She blinked once, too slowly. I nodded at her wristband. "I've seen those. Key fob for biometric fridge access. Temperature-sealed case." She lowered the drink and gave me a flat stare. "You're not a food writer." "No," I said. "But I know one. And I know a chemist. And I know a girl who hasn't been seen since she stood near you at that pop-up." Melba turned without a word and headed straight for the exit. I followed her to the stairwell and caught up at the second landing. "Melba," I said quietly, "don't make this theatrical. You didn't invent this thing, and if someone's hurt, you don't want to be holding the wrong end of the whisk." She stopped. "Who are you?" "Archie Goodwin, assistant to Nero Wolfe." Her eyes flickered. "The orchid guy?" "He's also the no-one-gets-away-with-it guy. What you served last week wasn't food, it was evidence. And your fridge? It's a crime scene." "I didn't hurt her," she said, quick now. "I swear, she came to me, said she needed money, said she could get me something Vale was hiding. And you bought it." "I thought it was legitimate." She showed me the lab notes, the process. Rusk was sloppy. She claimed he never secured the samples. I paid her $5,000 and told her to vanish for a week, just until I could test it, trial it. And then, she said someone had found out, that they were watching her. She got scared. She left a message saying she was going off-grid. I haven't heard from her since Friday." "Where's the message?" She hesitated. "I deleted it." I sighed. "You always delete potential blackmail material before brunch?" I panicked. "Where's the sample now?" "At the storage kitchen I rent in Midtown. Locked fridge. Fingerprint lock. Take me." She chewed her lip. "If I do, what happens to me?" "That depends on whether the sample's the only thing you bought from her." She took the stairs down and hailed a cab. I followed. 20 minutes later, we were standing in a rented culinary co-op, a sleek chrome space that smelled faintly of lemon oil and desperation. She led me to the back and pressed her finger to a matte black box fridge. The door unlatched with a quiet beep. Inside was a metal tray with 3 vials, one of them cracked open. Each was labeled with coded tape. Z1, Z2, Z3. Which one was used? Thursday? She pointed to Z1. "That's the one we diluted." "Any missing?" I don't think so." I looked closer. The cap had been turned, not fully sealed. A faint powder residue clung to the threads. "Who else has the code?" "No one." I pulled out a latex glove, standard Wolfe issue, and resealed the vial. "Melba, listen carefully. I need you to lock this fridge, stay away from pop-ups, and avoid every chef, critic and Instagram foodie you've ever met. That's not. It's necessary. Wolfe doesn't make requests. He makes conclusions. And right now, you're on the edge of one. Back at the brownstone, I handed Fritz the sealed bag containing the Z1 vial and the updated report. Wolfe barely waited for Fritz to vanish into the kitchen before speaking. She confirmed the sale. She says Lentz came to her, offered the process. She paid. Then Lentz got spooked and ghosted. Melba hasn't seen her since. Bah, of course she hasn't. She also left the fridge unlocked. One of the vials was tampered with. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Tampered how? Cap not fully tightened. Possible contamination or someone removed a portion. I nodded. Which could mean it's being used somewhere else. Again. Wolfe closed his eyes. Then we are not dealing with theft. We are dealing with propagation. You think someone's reproducing it? Number I thinks someone intends to. The formula is being handed off in pieces, sold, duplicated, obscured. Why obscure it? To avoid detection. A single event is theft. A chain is strategy. At that moment, Saul called. She's back, he said. Lentz. She entered her apartment at 11:15 p.m. alone, wearing sunglasses and a scarf. She looked scared. Window blinds down. She see you? No. Hold position. I turned to Wolfe. Maddie's back, wants to stay hidden. She will not succeed. She might run again. Then we must offer her something she values more than escape. What's that? Culpability, Wolfe said, rising slightly in his chair. The truth always arrives last, Mr. Goodwin, but it never forgets to knock. Saul Panzer called at 7:30 the next morning, just as Wolfe was preparing to retreat upstairs for his ritual orchid hour. Fritz answered the phone, handed it off with a curt nod, and disappeared like a man who wanted no part in early calls that began with tension and ended with instructions. Wolfe took the receiver with a sigh and listened. Yes. When? Alone? I see. Hold there. Do nothing else. He hung up, then looked at me. She left again. Maddie Lentz slipped out through the service entrance with a tote bag and no coat. Saul believes she's heading east, possibly toward the river. I stood. You want me to intercept? Number I want you to shadow her. If she meets anyone, take note. If she deposits something, recover it. If she speaks to anyone, remember every word. Understood. I grabbed my coat and made it to the building on Spring Street just in time to catch Saul's subtle hand gesture from across the road. He was leaning against a florist's van, looking as casual as a man with a mind like a scalpel can look. He tipped his head toward the alley. She went around the corner, hasn't emerged, probably trying to lose tails. Did she look like she knew she was being watched? She looked like she hadn't slept in 2 days and didn't trust concrete. I followed her path down the alley. It forked near a boarded-up cafe, then curved toward a fenced-in lot used for deliveries. I stayed back, moving slow. Then I saw her. Maddie Lentz, hunched in a gray hoodie, was crouched near a stack of broken crates, one hand inside her tote bag. She glanced around twice, once fast, once slow, then pulled something out and slid it between the crates. It was a manila folder, wrapped in plastic. She stood up fast, turned around, and froze when she saw me. Her eyes went wide, and for a second, I thought she'd bolt. I raised a hand, slow. I'm not here to arrest you, Maddie. I didn't hurt anyone. I believe you. Then why are you following me? Because Nero Wolfe doesn't like mysteries that go cold, and you right now are lukewarm and getting colder. She clutched the bag tighter. You work for Vale? For Rusk? I work for Wolfe. He doesn't cook, he doesn't sell, and he doesn't scheme. But he does understand lies, and he knows you've told at least 2. I was scared. Still are. She looked away. I didn't know it would get this big, I just wanted out. Out of what? She didn't answer. I pointed to the folder. That's the formula? She hesitated, then nodded. It's everything. Rusk's notes, my adjustments, Melba's changes. It's been modified 3 times. No one owns the original anymore. Why leave it here? Because I was going to run, but if something happened to me, I wanted the truth somewhere someone might find it. Someone like who? Anyone but them. She started to walk past me. I let her go, then doubled back and fished the folder out. It was sealed well, plastic zip, waterproof lining. Wolfe would appreciate the paranoia. I signaled to Saul with a glance, then left with the file in hand. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was mid-bite of sauced rabbit when I placed the folder on his desk. He frowned at the interruption, then wiped his fingers, opened it, and skimmed the contents. 10 pages in, he grunted. This is a disaster. Too complex? Too diluted? Too many hands? This is no longer a flavor. It's a referendum. A what now? Each iteration of the compound alters its chemical composition. One induces numbness, another creates olfactory hallucination. This one, when combined with citric acid, induces a mild euphoria. None of them are safe. All of them are replicable. And every party, Rusk, Vale, Melba, believes they own the rights. But none do? Correct. They own echoes. No one has the full chord. Then why all the cloak and dagger? Because in the culinary world, ownership is perception. If one of them is seen as the creator, they control the narrative, the revenue, and the future. So what's our next step? Wolfe looked up. We must compel honesty, not from them, from the truth itself. That's when the doorbell rang. Fritz opened it, then returned to the office with a faintly disapproving look. Miss Vale, he said. Wolfe grunted. Show her in. Antonia Vale entered like she'd been summoned by thunder, not choice. She wore a black dress that looked weaponized and carried herself with all the grace of a chess player 2 moves from checkmate. You asked for me? No, Wolfe said, but you anticipated being asked. She raised an eyebrow. Then why am I here? Because your assistant delivered to me a complete, if erratic, record of the compound's evolution, including your contributions. For once, she blinked. You, have the formula? Number Y have the corpse of a formula. Each party desecrated it in their own way. What remains is toxic, unstable, and, most damning, public. Vale sat down, carefully. You intend to expose it? I intend, Wolfe said, to stop the spread of it. She leaned forward. What do you want? Your signature on a declaration that you will withdraw all claims to the compound and cease further development under its name. In exchange, I will ensure that the files are destroyed. Quietly. No press. No scandal. She hesitated. And if I refuse? Then I will host a press conference tomorrow. I will present the formula, the known side effects, and the contradictory claims of ownership. I will do this while sitting in my chair, sipping beer, and naming names. Vale didn't speak for a long moment. Then she pulled out a pen. You'll have your statement by this evening. She left, silent. Wolfe turned to me. Contact Melba. Inform her the same terms apply. Then Rusk. Will they agree? They have no choice. By nightfall, I had 3 signed statements, each surrendering claims to the flavor compound, and 1 courier pickup scheduled to deliver the manila folder to an incineration service Wolfe trusted more than the post office. I watched the flames take the folder through the window of the courier van, then returned to the brownstone. Wolfe was finishing dessert. Pears poached in wine. He looked satisfied. It's done, I asked. Yes. No justice? Justice, he said, is often an act of containment. Not punishment. I poured myself a beer. So what was the lesson? Wolfe sighed. Flavor, Mr. Goodwin, is not just a matter of taste. It is trust, memory, and consequence. When you counterfeit those, you deserve the bitterness that follows. By the time the courier's taillights disappeared into the traffic, carrying the chemical Frankenstein that had driven 3 egos and a terrified assistant to the brink of professional collapse, the brownstone had already returned to its usual rhythm. Fritz resumed preparation for the next day's lunch as if nobody had ever tried to weaponize a flavor compound, and Wolfe had retreated to the plant rooms to murmur to his orchids about trust and human folly. I took a moment to stretch out in the front room, considering how we'd reached the point of forcing 3 separate signatures from people who'd each tried to steer the narrative of a shared lie. The formula was gone, but the taste of deception lingered in every corner of the case. And as usual, Wolfe had managed to resolve the matter without once rising from his chair. He'd orchestrated a 3-party surrender using little more than logic, veiled threats, and absolute refusal to let their chaos invade his home. But it wasn't over. Not really. At 9:40 p.m. the bell rang. Wolfe was in the dining room finishing his second helping of duck confit. He grumbled when Fritz interrupted him to report a visitor, but something in Fritz's tone made Wolfe glance up. "The visitor," he said, "was Maddie Lentz." "She's alone?" Wolfe asked. "She is," Fritz replied. "She says she won't sit, but she will speak." Wolfe sighed. "Bring her in." Maddie stepped into the office like someone who had finally stopped running but hadn't figured out what to do with stillness. She looked thinner, older, and more present than she had when I last saw her crouched by a crate in a delivery alley. She didn't wait for an invitation. "I came to say thank you," she said, "and to tell the truth properly this time." Wolfe regarded her with a blank stare. "You've already given us the files." "I know, but not the real reason." She shifted her weight, glanced at me, then locked eyes with Wolfe. "Everyone keeps asking why I sold the formula, why I gave it to Melba, why I ran. But it's not that simple. I wasn't trying to profit. I was trying to stop something." Wolfe remained motionless. She continued. "Doctor, Rusk didn't just invent a flavor compound. He tested it, on diners, without disclosure. He used microdoses in controlled dinners 6 months ago at a friend's restaurant in Queens. He wanted to see how it affected memory, mood, emotion. He didn't tell them what it was. Just that it was a palate enhancer." I sat forward. "Are you saying people were used as test subjects without consent?" She nodded. "I documented it. That's what I really gave you in the folder, the trial logs. The part I didn't want found in my apartment." Wolfe's voice was quiet. "Why not turn him in?" "Because he would have buried it. He's connected. He works with luxury clients, does quiet deals, ghost formulates for food corporations. He would have claimed it was a misunderstanding, a mislabeling, and Miss Vale. She didn't care. She just wanted exclusivity. She never asked how it worked, just if it was legal enough to serve, and when I raised concerns, Rusk warned me to back off. That's when I started keeping copies." Wolfe considered that. "You sold the formula not for gain, but as a warning." "Yes. I thought if it spread, it would get noticed, criticized, studied. Then someone would realize it wasn't safe, but instead everyone just wanted a piece of it. Melba, Vale, Rusk. They all saw potential, not risk." And when the reaction began to spiral, Wolfe said, "You ran." "Yes, but I didn't want to vanish forever. I wanted to come back when the smoke cleared. I just needed to see someone handle it who wasn't part of their world." She looked at Wolfe with something bordering on hope. "I thought maybe you could do that." Wolfe exhaled through his nose. "You were not wrong, but you were naive." He picked up the top sheet from his desk, one of the declarations. "The parties involved have renounced their claims. The files are destroyed. The compound is now legally and publicly unclaimed, but the implications remain." Maddie nodded. "So what happens now?" "That depends on you," Wolfe said. "You may submit the trial logs anonymously to the city's health board. You may speak to a reporter, or you may disappear again. I want to do the right thing. Wolfe gestured toward me. Mr. Goodwin will prepare a summary letter. You may deliver it with supporting documentation to a reputable outlet. I suggest the Ledger. They are cautious but principled, and they do not ignore citations. I rose and left to get the typewriter. Wolfe continued. Miss Lentz, the problem with concocting memory is that people remember what they wish. You tried to engineer exposure through replication. You are fortunate it did not become a fad before it became a headline. She almost smiled. I was scared no one would believe me. They wouldn't have. That is why you needed someone outside the kitchen. I returned with the typed letter and handed it to her. She held it like it was heavier than it looked. I'm not brave, she said. No, Wolfe agreed. But you are at least informed. That is rarer. She turned to go, then paused at the door. What happens to them now? Vale? Rusk? Melba? Wolfe shrugged. They will pretend this never occurred. They will redirect their energies, perhaps even collaborate again. In time, their ambition will resurface. But next time, they will remember. Someone was watching. She nodded once, then stepped out into the night. When the door closed, Wolfe leaned back in his chair, tapped a finger on his desk, and looked at me. Archie, do you find it amusing that those who attempt to control flavor often lose all taste for consequence? Depends, I said. Are we having dessert or not? Wolfe reached for his bell and summoned Fritz. We were. And for once, it didn't taste like trouble. Wolfe never liked residuals. He didn't care for lingering odors, unresolved arguments, or half-truths masquerading as peace. Which meant that even after Vale, Rusk, and Melba had signed their neat little disclaimers and vanished from our immediate orbit, Wolfe wasn't finished. He wasn't pacing, of course. He hadn't shifted more than 4 inches from his chair all morning. But the silence had weight. He was thinking, and when Wolfe thinks like that, it means someone still hasn't told him everything. By the time I returned from dropping Maddie's letter at the Ledger's downtown office, he was already on the phone with Saul. Wolfe hated calls during breakfast, but evidently he hated being stonewalled more. I caught the tail end of it. Yes, at once. Then meet Mr. Goodwin at the Brown Cafe on West 47th, 3 tables inside. Use the one in the rear. No substitutions. He hung up, looked at me. Melba was seen with a man named Dixon at the Edison event. Saul says he's a consultant for food distribution chains, imports flavor additives in bulk, mostly unregulated sources. Latin America, Southeast Asia. And his name appears in Maddie's trial log notes. Once, dated 7 weeks ago, she mentions RD advising Rusk on flavor durability, how long the effect lasts on the palate, the aftertaste impact. Wait, Dixon's an advisor now. Number Dixon is the buyer. I sat. You're saying Rusk was planning to sell the compound wholesale, not just to Vale or Melba, but for industrial use? Yes, in low concentration, mixed into processed meals, a trace additive, undetectable in small amounts but psychologically influential. I whistled. So this wasn't about signature dishes or food artistry. This was about shelf products. Mass influence through trace chemistry. That's not ambition, I said. That's war. Wolfe didn't disagree. Within an hour, Saul confirmed Dixon was active. He'd flown out of JFK 2 days earlier, destination Sao Paulo. Before leaving, he'd met twice with Rusk at his lab and once at an unnamed midtown location that matched the address of a private test kitchen. That put Rusk back in the middle of the board. Vale had wanted exclusivity, Melba had wanted to make noise, but Rusk? He had tried to build a distribution model. Quietly, legally questionable, and highly profitable. Saul believes, Wolfe said as I returned from the cafe meet, that Dixon already has enough formula fragments to begin trials elsewhere. Possibly Brazil where food regulations are more malleable. So what's the play? We already neutralized the local threat. The files are gone. The signatures are in place. Wolfe drummed his fingers once. The fragments exist in memory, Archie. In notes, in minds, in casual remarks. What Dixon needed was proof of effect. That was what Maddie's trial logs gave him. We burned the formula, yes, but the theory is intact. Then you want to stop Dixon overseas? Number that would require jurisdiction and exercise, both intolerable. He stood. Wolfe never stood during the day without good reason. But this time, he rose with careful purpose and crossed to the windows. I want to bring Rusk here, and I want him to hear what I know and what I will make known. I blinked. You're baiting him. I am anchoring him. When Rusk arrived later that afternoon, he looked alert and ready to argue. I could tell he'd convinced himself the crisis had passed, and he could spin his way into a new beginning. He'd even shaved and changed his shoes. Wolfe greeted him with a single glance. "Doctor, Rusk, sit." He did. "I have been made aware of your extended conversations with Mr. Dixon," Wolfe said. "I'm also aware that you intended to submit the compound formula, modified, stripped of origin, to a processing firm in Brazil under the name RC3. Rusk flinched. "That information is—" "Confirm or deny?" He hesitated. "You don't have jurisdiction." "Number, but I have reach. And if you do not wish your colleagues, past employers, and pending investors to receive documentation of your testing practices, including the undisclosed trials at Gaston Bistro in Queens, then I suggest you listen." Rusk's composure cracked. "You went through my notes." "Number, your assistant, gave me the truth. I merely arranged it." He leaned forward slightly. An inch of menace in Wolfe's bulk is more effective than a dozen threats from a lesser man. "You are to terminate all pending deals. You are to issue a statement declaring that the compound, in any of its forms, failed sensory compliance standards and will not be pursued further. You will not mention your partners. You will not mention your trials. You will vanish." Rusk's face turned red. "You can't make me. I don't have to. You will do it yourself, quietly, or I will become interested. And Mr. Goodwin becomes very enthusiastic when I am interested." I gave Rusk a smile that did nothing to ease his tension. "I'm not bluffing," Wolfe said, "and you are not the first man to mistake subtlety for weakness." Rusk sat there, breathing through his nose before finally nodding. "Fine." He stood, rigid. "I assume you'll verify?" "I will. Do not mistake my chair for confinement. It is a perch." When Rusk left, Wolfe didn't move for a long while. He stared at the spot the man had vacated, as if measuring the residue of his ego in the air. I poured a beer and set it in front of him. "Think he'll follow through?" "He's already drafting the letter." "And Dixon?" "Will find himself without product, without backing, and without legal cover." He took a sip. "Ambition, Archie, is a dish best left uncooked." I grinned. "Now that sounds like something we can serve cold." Wolfe actually smiled. Dinner that night was lemon risotto with thyme. Light, deliberate, and honest. No enhancements, no illusions. Just food made right. In the brownstone, that's the only kind that lasts. Wolfe always saved his strongest play for last, and he made it without theatrics, without volume, and without so much as standing from his chair. By the end of the following day, he had arranged for the 4 central players, Antonia Vale, Calvan Rusk, Melba, and Maddie Lentz, to sit together in his office, each in their designated chair, each without prior knowledge of who else would be present. It was the kind of ambush only Wolfe could execute, while still keeping it civil and entirely above reproach. The call had gone out under my name, as usual. "Mr. Wolfe requests your presence to conclude a matter of interest," and they'd all agreed, though for different reasons. Vale came out of calculation, Rusk out of fear, Melba out of ego, and Maddie because she needed to know it really was over. They arrived in this order. Vale, perfectly composed in a cream blouse and black slacks, her every movement sharpened by practiced control. Melba, a few minutes behind, wore a neutral grey dress and carried herself with a stiffness that hinted at legal advice. Rusk came next, sweating already, despite the spring chill outside. And Maddie, last, hesitant but here, stepped through the door with a quiet dignity that made the others glance her way with something between guilt and curiosity. Wolfe didn't greet them. He simply nodded to me to close the doors. "I have brought you here," Wolfe began, "not for reconciliation, nor for reconciliation's pretense. I have brought you here to listen. Each of you will speak only when addressed. You will remain until dismissed. If that proves difficult, I will consider you irrelevant." Rusk opened his mouth, thought better of it, and sat back. Wolfe looked at Vale first. "You commissioned a compound to make your cuisine unforgettable. In doing so, you authorized the use of experimental flavor chemistry without understanding its risks. When those risks became evident, you prioritized exclusivity over responsibility. You have since signed a declaration forfeiting all claims. You may believe this clears you. It does not." Vale said nothing, but her grip on her clutch tightened. He turned to Melba. "You purchased a fragment of an unstable compound, modified it, served it without regulation, and then planned to syndicate its use. You did so without disclosure. You also, like Miss Vale, signed a waiver. It means little. The compound's instability is now public knowledge. No agency will authorize its further use. You've not escaped consequence. You've only delayed it." Melba bristled but said nothing. Her eyes darted to Rusk. "Doctor." "Rusk," Wolfe continued, "you originated this chaos. You developed the compound, tested it on uninformed subjects, and sold versions of it to competing interests. You manipulated your assistant, attempted to offload culpability, and entered into negotiations with an international distributor known for bypassing health codes. You have since agreed, under threat, to withdraw. If you reverse course, I will make the documentation public and ensure your professional obituary precedes your own." Rusk went pale, his breath shallow. "And Miss Lentz," Wolfe said at last, "you attempted, albeit with questionable methods, to stem the tide. You exposed what others hid. You feared legal reprisal, perhaps rightly, but your actions, imperfect though they were, interrupted a dangerous trajectory. For that, you're owed a modicum of grace." Maddie glanced down, silent. Wolfe steepled his fingers. "The compound in question is no longer of interest. The files are gone. The formula is fragmented. What remains is reputation. Yours. And reputation, as you know, is not retained by possession. It is retained by silence." He let that hang in the air. "I have written a sealed summary of this affair. It contains no names, no direct citations, only the chronology of events and the cautionary note of its ethical void. It will not be published, unless one of you makes that necessary." Vale was the first to speak. "And what would that look like?" "Another attempt," Wolfe replied coldly. "Another kitchen, another variation, another sale. The moment this compound, or any compound derived from it, resurfaces, I act." Rusk shifted. "You expect us to, what? Live with this hanging over us forever?" "No," Wolfe said. "I expect you to live wisely." There was a long, humming silence. No one moved. Then Wolfe looked at me. "Archie, show them the report." I handed each of them a simple envelope. Inside was a one-page summary, the compound's chemical structure rendered unusable, the health board warning submitted by an anonymous source, and a printed reply from the ledger confirming they had declined to name individuals, but were retaining the anonymous letter for future reference. "You've neutralized the story," Melba said bitterly. I've contained the danger, Wolfe replied. Vale stood, and we're just supposed to walk out of here and pretend it never happened. Wolfe gave a slow nod. Precisely, unless you wish the alternative. None of them did. One by one they filed out. Melba first, brushing past Maddie without a glance. Rusk mumbled a strained goodbye and left with a sunken posture. Vale lingered a moment, looked at Wolfe, then at me, and said, You're thorough, Mr. Wolfe. Madam, I am methodical. Then she, too, was gone. Maddie stood near the door, envelope in hand. She didn't move. I don't know what to do next, she said. Then don't act yet, Wolfe replied. Wait until the silence stops sounding like failure. She nodded, then stepped outside. When the door clicked shut, Wolfe leaned back and exhaled. It's finished? I asked. It is. Resolved. Not the same thing. No, he agreed, but often preferable. We sat in silence a moment. Then I asked the question I'd been chewing on for days. Did you ever think about letting the story break? I did. And the world is already saturated with scandal. Let one truth fade quietly, and perhaps the next will be louder. He reached for his beer, took a sip, and closed his eyes. Some things, he murmured, are best forgotten, even if they were made to be remembered. The brownstone had returned to stillness by the next morning. The orchids were thriving, the refrigerator had been restocked with Fritz's preferred mushrooms, and Wolfe was back to reading 18th century history with one hand while lifting a fork with the other. Nothing in the house bore the scent of scandal, nor the residue of synthetic memory compounds. And yet I could feel something lingering, not guilt, not triumph, something in between. A sense that we'd handled something too large to fully contain, even if we'd stopped its sharpest edge from cutting deeper. Wolfe hadn't spoken much since the office gathering. When he goes quiet like that, it's not brooding. It's digestion. Mental, not physical. He'd dissected each motive, each ambition, and each concession, and now he was letting the moral implications settle like a heavy meal. I gave him his space. You don't interrupt a man when he's sorting through the wreckage of other people's appetites. It was mid-afternoon when the last ripple reached our shores. A slim envelope slid through the mail slot. No stamp, no postmark. Just my name, written in blue ink that looked tentative, as if the sender had paused between each letter. Inside was a folded page and a photograph. The note read, Mr. Goodwin, thank you for not asking questions I couldn't answer at the time. I've accepted a lab position overseas, nothing grand, but quiet. I've decided to work with sense instead of taste. Less room for manipulation, more for memory. Dr. Rusk won't find me again, and I've made sure Vale and Melba won't either. I'm not proud of how I handled everything, but I'm still here. That counts for something, I hope. Maddie. The photo was of a coastal view, cliffside pines and a narrow balcony with lab glass drying in the sun. There were no faces, but the intention was clear. She'd left not just the city, but the hunger that came with it. I brought the letter to Wolfe. He read it once, twice, then folded it and placed it inside the back of his address book, where he kept items not worth framing but not worth discarding either. She was never the threat, he said. No, I replied. She was the only one with a conscience. He nodded. That is often the person left running. He stood, an unexpected move, and walked to the windows, staring out at the magnolia tree blooming late this season. The pursuit of originality, he said slowly, has turned tasteless. That's what this was about in the end, wasn't it? Not flavor, not profit. Ownership of sensation, of memory, a pathetic ambition. I crossed the room and sat on the edge of the desk. Do you think they'll try again? Any of them? Perhaps, but not with each other. Trust has been extinguished. Then we've done what we could. Yes, he said, turning back. We preserved the sanctity of choice. He returned to his chair and reached for his beer. It is not illegal to remember, he said, but it is perilous to profit from someone else's. I poured one for myself and leaned back. You know, we've dealt with a lot of strange things, but this one's going to sit with me. Not because it got dangerous, but because it got close. Wolfe lifted an eyebrow. Close? To the edge. To becoming something permanent. If we hadn't stepped in when we did, that compound would have landed in 1,000 mouths, and no one would have known where the feeling came from. He nodded once. And feelings without origin are the most exploitable kind. We toasted in silence. That evening, Fritz served a roasted poussin with rosemary juice. Nothing enhanced. No powder, no unnamed additive, no illusion of childhood picnics or rain-soaked nostalgia. Just clean meat, crisp skin, and a side of warm lentils. As we ate, I realized how rare it had become to trust what was in front of you, to believe what your senses told you without a second guess. After dinner, Wolfe retired to the plant rooms. I stayed back in the office, thumbing through a stack of old case notes, half looking for distractions. I found one, a clipping from the ledger, dated 6 weeks earlier. A minor foodborne illness had struck patrons at a high-end chef showcase, numb lips, blurry vision, and vague euphoria. No deaths, no lawsuit, just a paragraph. It had been buried, ignored. No one had made the connection. I folded it again and slipped it into a drawer. Wolfe came down an hour later with soil under his nails and a fresh towel around his shoulders. He poured a second beer without asking if I wanted one. I suppose, he said, we should be grateful it didn't end in violence. I laughed. Just the violent stripping of reputations. Which, Wolfe said, some might argue is worse. We sat there as the city dimmed outside, and the brownstone returned to the exact balance it always seeks. Quiet, full, vigilant. There would be other cases. Always are. But I had a feeling this one would linger for Wolfe longer than he'd admit. It hadn't involved murder or blackmail, or even theft in the traditional sense, but it had touched something deeper, something he rarely spoke about but always circled, the manipulation of experience. Before turning in, Wolfe added one final note to his private file on the case. He wrote, "A taste that sought to override memory is not a flavor. It is a falsification of truth. And truth, in any form, must remain unseasoned." And that was that. The next morning, the sun rose, the orchids were misted, and breakfast was served without commentary. And no one, absolutely no one, mentioned the ingredient nobody bought. A week passed, no one called. No statements were issued. The Ledger published a lukewarm editorial on ethical culinary innovation that hinted at danger but never named names. It drifted through inboxes like a faint aftertaste, there, but not compelling enough to chew on. Rusk disappeared from social media and speaking circuits. Melba cancelled 2 scheduled appearances and claimed creative burnout. Vale launched her Chicago location with a new menu that promised clarity through simplicity, which translated into a lot of shaved vegetables and clean lines. Maddie's name wasn't mentioned anywhere. Inside the brownstone, the world moved on. That's what it does. The orchids grew, the soup simmered. Fritz returned to making his famous cassoulet on Thursdays. Wolfe didn't bring up the case again, but I knew it was still percolating in his mind. Just below the surface, like the memory of a song you almost remember but can't quite hum. Then, 3 days ago, a package arrived. No return address, just Wolfe's name in tight block lettering. Inside was a single jar, small, unmarked, filled with clear gelatin flecked with golden threads. No note, no instructions, just the jar. I brought it to Wolfe. He stared at it, then at me. "Open it." I cracked the seal. It smelled faintly citrusy, familiar but indistinct. Wolfe took one whiff and closed the lid. "Melba," he said. "A test. A provocation. She's trying again. Number, she's trying me." He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He simply stood, placed the jar in a sealed tin, and handed it to me. "Destroy it." I hesitated. "Don't you want to know if it's the same?" "I already know. It's the same idea. Rebranded, retextured, recontextualized. The ambition is identical. She wants sensation without responsibility, reaction without risk." I took the jar and incinerated it in Fritz's kitchen furnace, the same one we'd used for stubborn sauces and unreadable pamphlets over the years. When I returned, Wolfe was rereading Montaigne and sipping beer. Just another day. That night, over a modest dinner of roast duck and glazed carrots, I asked him something that had been on my mind since the beginning. "Why did you really take the case?" Wolfe wiped his mouth. "Because my house was disturbed." "More than that," he considered. "Because the idea offended me. The presumption that memory could be engineered, sold, and swallowed. It was, how would you say it? Arrogant." I nodded. "So it wasn't the danger?" "No," he said. "It was. The lie. The one wrapped in perfume and plated on porcelain." He leaned back, eyes half-lidded. "There is no substitute for experience, and anyone who claims to bottle one is worse than a fraud. They are a thief." He reached for the final slice of pear tart. "And I do not suffer thieves." I poured us both a drink. Wolfe raised his glass a fraction. I raised mine in kind, and that was the end of the ingredient nobody bought. It didn't kill, it didn't steal, it didn't poison in the traditional sense. But it tried to do something worse. Rewrite what people remember. And Wolfe? He didn't let it. Because in his house, truth isn't an acquired taste. It's the only thing on the menu.